I mean that was like exactly spitting right in the face of people. Now there a thing came out a few years ago, and I want to get your take on this as a fellow researcher. There was a document called "The Sin of Solicitation" that was leaked by AB. Could you tell us a bit about that?
First of all, your listeners should understand that in February of 1961, when Pope John 23rd was holding the papal office, there was a document issued on the vetting the screening of seminarians for the religious life and the priesthood. And this document forbade across the board the ordination of homosexuals and most especially of pederasts. The following year, in February of 1962, a backup document was published, and this was specifically on the problem of sexual solicitation of both men and both of minors, male and female, in the confessional. Now, this is not a new problem because St. Peter Damian in the year 1049 said...
Yeah, we got some older material on that, yeah.
Yeah, right. So this is not a practice, but a new practice. It is, however, a serious problem. It is distinct from other issues of pederasty and homosexuality because of the complexity of the seal of confession, which binds the priest under the penalty of death, of certain spiritual death, excommunication, that the priest cannot reveal in any way any details regarding the confession of the penitent. So I say that this is a complex issue. I just reread the document, and I've read it on a number of occasions. And what the document says is that should a young person or should a penitent of any age be solicited in the confessional for sexual acts, be they homosexual or heterosexual acts, that he must report this, or she must report this to the church authorities. Now, if you look at that, I think there was a month period of reporting, and they had to do this under the penalty of excommunication. In other words, the responsibility was on the youth to report this crime. Now, the best that can be said about this, it's totally unrealistic given the means of grooming victims and the cleverness with which the homosexual pederast managed to manipulate the youth. So anyway, the whole intent was really off kilter, based on putting the responsibility on the youthful penitent. Who would the penitent go to, especially if the confessor was his own parish priest? But on the other hand, it did not. It also put a seal of silence on both until the issue was brought up. So, as I said, my take on this is that it's extremely complex because it involved the seal of confession. Now, supposedly, this document has been replaced by the norms established in the new Code of Canon Law for 1983, and also there were additional norms. But I guess my point here is that this is particularly complex because of the issue of the seal of confession. And I think this is what makes that this is the center or the crux of the problem of how to do justice to the victim, how to remove the offending And by the way, that document is available online and now, and it's actually quite readable and I think quite understandable. Is this document a smoking gun? Um, in a way it is, and in a way it isn't. I think it is because of it's just totally unrealistic with regard to the victims' obligations. And but I think it's also not a smoking gun because the issue revolves around how to maintain the seal of confession, yet obtain justice, I think, for the victim.
Well, what's a bit spooky about it is it talks about transferring the priest who's accused of breaking the seal or sexually seeking sex from someone in a confessional, which has happened many times. So it was a secret document and it was leaked out, and it's very odd because it sure doesn't make the Vatican look good no matter what you make of it. You know,
no, now, when we come to the pattern of cover-ups, I think that I think it was the element of cover-up that made this particular crisis develop in the way that it has. I mean, the fact that there may be perverts in the clergy or perverts in in the teaching profession or perverts in the music profession, that doesn't come to anyone's surprise. But the fact that once it was found out, once it was discovered that there were either homosexual bishops engaged in these acts, or whether it was a religious, or whether it was a diocesan priest, what was done once the truth was revealed? And the fact is that in almost every instance, in fact, I can't think of one instance in which the church openly, without any pressure from the secular press or any organized group of victims, admittedly on its own came out, condemned, defrocked, and turned over to the authorities a priest or religious who was guilty of a criminal assault on a minor. I think it definitely was the cover-up. And you see, part of this reason for the cover-up was the fact that the persons in charge, whether they be the religious superiors of orders or whether they were the diocesan bishop or the cardinal, many of these, because they were involved themselves in illicit sexual acts, were blackmailable. Bernardin was certainly a blackmailable candidate, as was Spellman and all the homosexual bishops that he appointed. So this becomes then this fact of homosexuality not only in the orders but in the hierarchy is a major factor in the cover-up.
Now, it's quite amazing because there were a few whistleblowers out there. I should tell people, a friend of mine, Father Malachi Martin, who I knew him the last 5 years of his life, and he was certainly exposing this before the Boston Globe broke this major big story about Bernard Law in 2002, January of 2002. But I should point out to Catholics and non-Catholics alike that there were people in the church who were aware of this problem. Clergyman Father Charles Fiore was another one of these priests who was trying to blow the whistle on this situation. So there were people there. I want to say that not everyone, there were Roman Catholic priests who, when they became aware of the situation, tried to change it. Now, both those men died before this big story broke in 2002. But Randy, you as well were one of, though you're not a clergy person or in a religious order or a nun, you were one of these people before 2002 who were out there pointing out these sorts of things. And, I just want to acknowledge that for people. But now someone like me, when I was told about it, Father Malachi Martin told me about this in '96, this whole scenario, and even said Cardinal Bernard Law was running a pedophile ring up here in Massachusetts, where I'm from. I was one of the people who was in denial. I didn't buy it until it broke in 2002. So you got to remember that when people became aware of this before 2002, there were people like yourself and Father Fiore and people like me who just didn't believe it. So there were different reactions. Now, of course, I believe it 110%, of course. But I just wanted to point that out, that there were different reactions before 2002, and my own reaction was initially wrong. I want to say that clearly.
And don't forget, Bill, Father Enrique Rueda wrote
Right.
a classic book called The Homosexual Network. That was in 1982.
That is another person who was very big in this. There were several people that those are the ones I know of. I have heard of that book, and there were whistleblowers before the Boston Globe broke the story. But when you consider that the cover-up was so extensive, and I'll just give a quick breakdown. People are very familiar with Father Paul Shanley, who was one of the founding members of NAMBLA. He definitely was. He was a keynote speaker at their first meeting called the Man-Boy Love Meeting in 1977.
Right, and that's documented in my book. We both did a good job on it.
Oh, sure. But just to point out that Father Paul Shanley was protected by the then police chief of Boston. What happened, the first openly gay elected official in the United States, a woman from Massachusetts named Elaine Noble, was a state representative here, and she was very famous, the first, as I said, openly gay lesbian to be elected. She found out about Paul Shanley's rape of children via the gay community. Paul Shanley used to take young boys to bathhouses in Boston's gay section called the South End, which is near the Back Bay. And what they would do is these owners of these bathhouses didn't particularly like 11 and 12 and 13-year-old boys being brought in there by Paul Shanley. So who they told was Representative Elaine Noble, who went to the Boston police chief and also to Barney Frank, who was a local politician, and she did,
and homosexual,
and openly gay homosexual man. But these are three people that knew about Shanley's activity, and the three of them decided not to go public with this. And when you talk about conspiracies and government cabals, this is like a bolt of lightning in that area. It's quite stunning. And Elaine Noble was in a documentary about, I'll send you a copy of it, in fact, that was done on local television here on NECN, the New England Cable News Network. And she's on TV crying, saying, "Oh, the poor children, I try." She covered up for this man, as did Barney Frank, as did the police chief of Boston. So what we're looking at is really a major church government conspiracy to allow the continued rape of children. So,
and in the case of Shanley, there were hundreds and hundreds of people who knew exactly what he was doing. I mean, it was what we would call common knowledge from his early years, all the way through, from the seminary all the way through, and he was permitted to do this. Now, even if a bishop had no religious sentiment at all, you would think